I like to think that I play a decent variety of video games, even if my library tends to skew more towards JRPGs than anything else. I'm not above playing more action-oriented games or psychological horror, but one thing I've never really been interested in has been the Soulslike series of games popularized by From Software. I mean, I say popularized, but Demon's Souls and Dark Souls were the games that really launched the genre into the popularity it has today. There are quite a few developers that have looked to capitalize on this with their own games, such as Lies of P and Code Vein. Out of those two, I've only played Code Vein, and while I did eventually beat it, that was more through just brute forcing it rather than, as the saying goes, getting good. For some reason, the mechanics just weren't clicking with me, and I'd never played anything in this genre before, so Code Vein is really the only experience I had with this sort of thing. Actually, I guess you could include Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origins, though I hear that's more like Neo, which I haven't played, but there are some overlapping systems. Even Blasphemous has some elements of this kind of thing, even if it's a side-scroller. So maybe I have more experience than I thought. Whatever the case, I even mentioned in my Stellar Blade review that I was glad the game wasn't a Dark Souls sort of system because I just really wasn't that fond of them. That's not to say there weren't some similarities, but it's much more forgiving. I had also heard and read too much from people who were die-hard addicts to the Soulsborne genre that I was sort of put off. If you weren't someone with just oodles of time to dedicate to memorizing patterns and beating your head against a wall for hours on end until having an epiphany or breakthrough about why you suck at the game and get better, then these games aren't really for you. They're only for real gamers.
Bro, why are you acting like you ain't got 60 hours to fight one fucking boss, bro? Just quit your fucking job. Be fucking homeless. I don't want to do this.
Oh yeah. The gatekeeping is sort of ridiculous as well, but whatever. These are the same sorts of people I feel call every game that comes out these days mid, because unless they're being brutally stomped in the nads, they don't feel like the game is any good.
Yeah, isn't it fun not using any of the fun mechanics in the game? Bro, I'm not having fun, nigga. I was having fun before.
Sweaty tryhards. That's what I'm getting at. Anyway, earlier this year, I saw a trailer for a game called Wuchang Fallen Feathers, and at the time I saw it, there wasn't much time left before release, maybe only a few weeks. It looked cool, the setting and the aesthetics were right up my alley, and the combat looked fun, but sadly there was no in memoriam to Old Dirty anywhere. A shame, really.
Wuchang!
However, after doing some research, I found out that this was going to be another Souls-like game, and I just about decided against getting the game. However, the price point, like Clear Obscure Expedition 33, wasn't that high, so I figured it was worth the attempt, and I picked it up on launch day. So, was it worth it? Did the game defeat me, or was I able to finally get good and beat the game? And was it actually worth my time? And the answer to both of those is a resounding yes, though that isn't without some caveats which I'll get to at the end of this. I figure most people watching this have probably played a Souls-like before, and so it isn't really worth the effort to break down all the mechanics of the game. XP, or Red Mercury, as it's called in this game, is gained through killing enemies, and you can then use that to level up and spend those points to unlock nodes throughout your skill tree. You have primary stats of strength, agility, magic, and feathering, which seem to have a hard cap of 50 points. It's not to say you can't plug more into them, but the diminishing return on that is pretty significant, so it's generally not worth it. Endurance and Vitality affect your stamina and HP pulls respectively, and, to my knowledge, don't have a significant cap to them. You also unlock weapon skills and abilities for the various weapon classes, as well as increasing your mastery for these weapons all the way up to plus 10. You can also unlock acupuncture points, which allow for the use of certain buffs, or allow you to inflict certain debuffs through tempering your weapon, and you can upgrade your health flask, which allows you to raise your capacity to 15. As for other mechanics, you have a meter which gauges your madness, which at full capacity increases damage dealt and taken. Should you die in this state, you can't just go back and collect your dropped mercury. Instead, when you come back to the point where you died, you have to fight a warrioress demon that will try to kill you. If you lose to her, all your mercury is gone and you have to start collecting again from scratch. Basically, don't die at full madness and you're fine. However, at full madness, your mercury gain also increases. So, if you're farming for XP/mercury, being at full madness is great, but use it in an area where you know enemy patterns and can farm without much risk of getting killed unexpectedly. One great thing about how this works is you can respec and redo any of your nodes at any time when you access a shrine/waypoint. The downside is that there is no way to save loadouts, so if you want to redo your build, you'll need to probably redo all your stats again. I say that, but most weapons scale off strength or agility, some scaling off both, and so if you get to be a much higher level and had a lot of points into both, it's not that big of a deal to change things up. There's some pretty good magic builds as well that people have come up with, and a lot of magic nodes are tied to using twin daggers, so if you want to go that route, there are a lot of nodes behind that weapon tree as well. That weapon also lets you cheese a lot of the bosses as well, so if you're struggling, you can look up a leech build and essentially play on easy mode. Now, I know I said there's a lot of gatekeeping for these kind of games, but I'll admit, I refused to make things easier for a boss just because they were killing me repeatedly. I wanted to stick to my longsword and learn the fight and beat it with that setup. Cheesing it wouldn't be satisfying at that point. So, while I accept that it's a way of doing it, I also kind of look down on it. I know. If the game lets you do it, then far be it from me to tell you how to play.
Bro, this is not how you play the game. You're using fucking ashes of war, stuff it into fucking Ginyu forces. Oh, bro.
I mean, they told me I could use this stuff. I'm not supposed to use this? Bro, I thought you were a real man. I can go get some tampons to go along with your bleed damage, you fucking pussy.
I just wouldn't find it satisfying, which is something a lot of veterans of this genre say as well. I fully understand the sentiment, but I'm not going to force people to sticking with the same build if the game stops being fun for them. Anyway, I digress. The most important thing beyond weapon mastery is your gear. Again, this is where loadouts would be nice, because certain boss fights will kick you into the dirt unless you have the right mitigation on your armor. However, not every boss's weaknesses or strengths are reflected in the environment leading up to them. Your armor may be great for the trash you fight throughout the various zones, but it may be wildly inefficient if the boss has, say, incredibly strong lightning attacks and your armor has no mitigation. You'll often find yourself changing armor sets for this reason, and that can be a bit cumbersome at times. Still, once you get the mitigation correct, your survivability can go way up. Weapon skills like being able to parry also go a long way in certain fights. Speaking of parrying and dodging, the main source of your strength is going to be through dodging. Dodging grants you a stack of Skyborn Might, which is reflected in the lower left of the UI. You can unlock up to 5 of these, and it's best to do this early on. Many of your strongest moves spend these, and certain spells can consume up to 4 and 5. If you have such spells but only have 3 stacks, guess what you won't be using? However, dodging isn't the only way to accrue might, since certain weapon traits will allow you to gain might as well. For example, the longsword branch allows you to gain might through the second hit of a combo. Best way to accrue at that point is to do a 1-2 combo and give yourself enough of a breather to then do another 1-2 without accidentally triggering the third hit of a combo. This allows you to use useful spells like Divine Ward, which ups your defense, and Burning Flames, which I used constantly to inflict burn on bosses, which most of them are susceptible to in some way. Other things you gather include things called benedictions, which can be equipped to one weapon and only one weapon at a time, which, again, sort of an annoying quality of life issue. If you want to equip a different weapon, you have to unequip these benedictions from the other one. Again, if this was set up as a loadout, which would automatically swap things around, this wouldn't be a problem. These benedictions grant you buffs under certain circumstances, such as the number of weapon skills, called disciplines, you know. Equipping them all gives you a set bonus of even more damage dealt if you know 12 disciplines. Some of these can be bought, while the others are discovered through exploration. All things considered, the game is pretty straightforward when it comes to how the game mechanics work. The biggest issue is going to be the get good part of the game. As I said before, I have very little experience in these types of games, and learning the appropriate moment to dodge and when to strike took some time. Most bosses took me multiple tries to beat, some more than others. I think the lowest one only took me about 3 or 4. The worst was at the end of Chapter 1, Commander Honglan. There was another boss before her that took me a good number of attempts to beat due to the sudden difficulty spike for that point of the game, but this was the first one that really just stomped me into the dirt relentlessly. I don't know about you, but I'm not one to give up on a boss fight. Rarely ever will I take a step away from a game and come back to it later, since I refuse to give the game the satisfaction of making me quit. I almost hit that point many times with her. I think it ultimately took me probably 4 hours or so to beat her, and there were several times I just didn't know what was happening. Slowly but surely, something changed. I started noticing more details about her attack patterns and how movesets that started out almost identical had subtle changes that indicated which variation would come next. Once I got the hang of it, I was able to get through her first phase pretty quickly. However, once she got below 50% health or thereabouts, she ramped things up with new moves, and once again I was back to getting absolutely bodied. I refused to give up, and after mastering her first phase pretty consistently, I finally had enough times of seeing her new moves that I got a better handle on it until I ultimately was able to get my revenge and beat her. Probably would have helped if I had remembered that being able to parry was a thing, because that makes other bosses, including her reprise near the end of the game, a lot easier to deal with. Hindsight being 2020 and all. That really sets up the biggest thing I liked about the game. None of the boss fights felt cheap or impossible. I realized that if I was getting repeatedly beaten, I was the problem. The bosses weren't being arbitrary or random. They used the same moves the same way every time. I was the one not properly reading the cues and getting sloppy. When I started getting frustrated and impatient with the game and myself, I would notice myself playing worse. Once I beat Honglan, very few bosses ever gave me anywhere as much trouble. If you can get past her, you can get past anyone. She is the quintessential skill check that determines who continues and who goes on to Reddit to whine about the game being unfair. Now, in all fairness, some of this isn't just due to skill issue, though a lot of it is. The early getting up and healing animations were atrocious. It took forever for Wuchang to get up off the ground, and the iframes allowed you to just get brutally knocked to the ground repeatedly until dead. Healing took forever, so if you tried to start healing at the wrong time, you'd get wrecked and likely knocked to the ground and would die there. Pre-patch 1.5, all of those were incredibly frustrating, but it was something I had to take into account while playing up through the second zone. My version was patched not long after beating the commander across the bridge in that area. Speaking of patch 1.5, once that dropped, all hell broke loose. There were some good quality of life changes to the animations, which made healing and getting up feel smoother, so you had a little more leeway, and some of the enemy AI was tweaked. How? I don't exactly know, but I think it had something to do with their attack rotations and not just spamming combos constantly, at least not the same one, without giving any breathing room. Some see that as an unnecessary change in difficulty, but even with that, you still have to know the attacks and be able to recognize them and counter them instead of just being stressed out and completely torqued the entire battle. I had that enough with Honglan, and I did not wish to experience that with every boss in the game. The most controversial part of the patch had to do with what was considered to be massive censorship. I'll try my best to explain this as best I can, but there's a little difficulty here. I say it's difficult because I am not a Chinese resident, nor am I completely up to speed on my ancient Chinese history or modern ethnic politics within China. Crazy, I know. Who would have suspected the 40-year-old white dude isn't exactly an expert on Chinese domestic politics? It's the same reason I'm not going to bother trying to pronounce half the names in the game. I think we all understand the reason for that.
Let's talk about Chinese people with their kung fu and all that silly chang chang chong talk. I can't understand you. Go back to your country, white power.
Wait, no, not that reason. I played it with the original Chinese language audio just like I only watch subbed anime because I'm a filthy weeb. I just don't want to butcher the more complicated looking names, I swear. Anyway, getting back to the controversy, the developers made some drastic changes. Several bosses based on historical figures from the Ming Dynasty no longer die when you defeat them. Instead, they have additional dialogue they can give once defeated. Also, in Zone 4, the original version up through version 1.4 was absolutely chaotic. Don't get me wrong, it still is, and there are still a lot of enemies, but now all of the Ming-style enemies no longer try to kill you. That doesn't really make sense in light of the narrative, since the whole idea is that because of Wuchang's disease, the feathering, everything is going to try to kill you, human and monster alike.
如今侠士月华并发，毕生难遇。若是贸然出去，被外面的人见着，只怕会被当作妖物除掉。目前留在寺中静养，有官兵看护，也还算得安全。
Suddenly, in Zone 4, the humans no longer attack you unless they become infected and become one of the feathered enemies. Now, why would the devs do this? Again, I'm not an expert on this situation, so I can only really go off what those who reportedly live in China have said. For example, here are two comments in specific that sort of flesh this out. The first one says, Chinese speaker here, for anyone who wants to know the real reason why this happened, let me explain. I think there's a cultural nuance behind why this game got so much backlash. The English title is Wuchang Fallen Feathers, but in Mandarin it's called something, which means late Ming Dynasty. The Ming collapse is a very famous and sensitive period in Chinese history, remembered as the last Han Chinese dynasty before the Manchu-led Qing took over. Chinese players criticized the game for appearing to favor the Manchu, the Qin dynasty's ethnicity, over Han Chinese. There are claims the game omitted Qin representation and instead focused on killing Ming figures who were ethnically Han. That fueled a narrative where people felt the game was pro-Manchu or anti-Han, which touched on ethnic tension. Since the majority of Chinese today are Han, the backlash naturally became much louder. At least this time, it really wasn't about the government forcing censorship, it was backlash from the Chinese community itself. You can see this in the negative reviews. The majority are from Chinese players, and most of the people who bought the game early were also Chinese. The devs just compromised because of the pressure. And to make things worse, when the game first launched, the price in China was actually higher than in the rest of the world, which already upset a lot of players before the story controversy even began. Personally, I was planning to buy this game at first, but now I think I'll wait a while and see if they add more patches or extra story paths to make the whole thing feel more coherent. Another commenter would add more context with the following. Exactly. People are beyond ignorant about the full truth. My English isn't good, but this isn't the full story. Let me explain. The story of this game takes place in Sichuan, in same exact date of massive killing done by Manchu. Same exact date, same exact location. The heroes were all from same time of China. The problem didn't end there, since the developer himself was a Manchu Chinese and he didn't add any Manchu boss. Basically, you could kill Chinese Han people, but not Manchu people. Han people are the majority of China. They are over 1 billion people. While China is diverse, they have 56 different ethnic groups and different culture. The Manchu developer portrayed Sichuan genocide, the timing, the location, and all the names matched. This was the reason why many Chinese were angry. You could open Chinese social media that you can access like RedNote and check all the posts about it. The Chinese Qin dynasty is filled with nothing but pain for Han people. From footbending done by Manchu to cutting off your head if you didn't adapt Manchu culture, the Manchu people were also against this game as well, since they don't want to glorify the wrongdoing of past. The gamers said to change the timing of the story and also add Manchu boss to destroy, and that's what the game is trying to do, and that's it. They are trying to add more Manchu bosses and change some names and the timing. But the people are far, far beyond ignorant in comment section here. I'm so disappointed. The Qin Dynasty culture was never accepted for Han people, and they get rid of it, but people here say that was Chinese culture when it wasn't. Chinese Han culture, the 5,000 years of history, was replaced by Manchu in these 200 years. I don't care if you hate or love any Chinese, but you should try to understand their point of view of history. I see so many ignorant comments here saying, oh, you just want to be Han. The Chinese all have their DNA checked, you know. And in China, there's a rule for ethnic group college opportunities, so everyone are having their ethnic group checked by DNA. Biggest ethnic group after Han people, 1 billion and 100 million, is Mao people of China. They're 9 million. You see the difference between the number of first and second group. Let's see if USA and portray white people as evil while black people as hero. Well, I mean, there already is a lot of that, so... And if you had a history where white people get genocide and the developer was black, you all would show the same reaction. I see you did for many games that was done by the woke side. So don't be ignorant, please. Don't be ignorant. The game was portrayed as if German make a game about same time as World War and portray Hitler as hero. You cannot harm Germans, but you can harm every American you see. Now, I can't personally vouch for how accurate either of those comments are. For example, I've seen no indication the devs are including Manchu bosses now, but it makes sense to me up to a point. What do I mean? Well, I can understand how there may be some touchy issues related to certain periods of history. Even today, if you don't preface every discussion of the Civil War with slavery bad, then you're accused of endorsing slavery and hating black people or trying to deny slavery ever existed. Those who say that maybe we shouldn't teach slavery as though it was the only thing that happened in the US prior to 1865, or that everything was just white supremacy and therefore future generations have inherited guilt from their white ancestors, whether they own slaves or not, are shouted down as denying history and trying to avoid teaching slavery. That's not the point. The point is to not exclusively focus on the negative. I taught US history. I covered all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. However, there was always a sense of, this is what was going on that was good, here were the bad things happening around the same time, and here's how these things were eventually dealt with, and the consequences and progress that resulted from dealing with it. You can be balanced about these things. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who think any nuance or any balance to such issues means you're a racist and you just hate black people and want to deny anything bad happened, which is far from the truth. So, when it comes to this reaction from China, I get how these things can be very sensitive. Now, I may just be an uninformed round eye, but there was nothing in Wuchang that felt like it was glorifying the turmoil in China and the slaughter going on. Nowhere in the lore of the game is it stated that these filthy Han people got what was coming to them. This is a highly fictionalized version of China, even if some of the lore is based on historical people and cultures, the Bo people, for example, and, from what I understand, some of these historical figures were already dead when the game takes place. This, of course, ties in with part of the theme of the game and the idea of seeking immortality. I went back in and watched a video from the Lorebrarians that digs deep into the story and lore from the game and ties all the environmental storytelling together. If you played through and missed some of it, like I absolutely did, then they do a great job of filling in the gaps. Several of these figures had been resurrected in an attempt to fight back against the invasion, or were given unnaturally long life by having certain ancient relics, but the method behind their resurrection is totally at odds with the laws of nature and are causing problems. Wuchang isn't fighting them because she hates the remnants of the Ming dynasty, they're just in her way and they see her as a threat due to having the feathering. Again, there's so much of this that is fictionalized, something the game says at the start, that it's hard to see why this was an issue. It's just like when people on either side of the culture war debate see one sliver of information about a game and then jump to wild conclusions about the end result. The left does it, and as I've been vocal about, people on my side of the aisle are just as guilty about having knee-jerk reactions to things without doing a modicum of research into it. I say that because when you take in the entire story of what's happening in Wuchang, the Ming Dynasty plays a very small role. The story of the cultures in that region go back far earlier and deal with avian creatures and hidden underground cities and a lot of other things tying into something called the primordial deity. There's themes drawn from Buddhism and Taoism that are interwoven throughout, but the main story is on Wuchang and her desire to bring back her sister. The Ming Dynasty collapsing is just window dressing for what was happening in that time period and really isn't a major plot point other than you knowing that there's an invasion, the Qin Dynasty is taking over, and there's something sketchy going on with certain figures being present that, if I remember correctly, should have been long dead. There's also searching for relics that would grant immortality, which is the biggest part of the story. Now that touches on events surrounding the collapse of Ming, but again, that's not the main focus. Given what was going on at the time, why wouldn't these warring forces look for something like that to give them an edge? Think of it like Assassin's Creed, where your character is interacting with certain historical characters and events, but the real story is about something that is much bigger than these events and characters. So, does not letting these Ming Dynasty bosses die when you defeat them really change the story? It's tonal whiplash, if nothing else, since they suddenly go from wanting to kill you to, oh, it was just a glorified sparring match. Congratulations, and on with your quest. From what I can tell, the 4 endings all remain the same, and again, the story really doesn't seem to be about the Ming Dynasty itself. That's a small piece of a much larger story, at least from what I understand of the narrative anyway. So, does it really change anything in the plot? Again, not from what I can tell. I don't think there's been any major lore changes that I'm aware of. I think the changes of the bosses are getting made into a much bigger deal than they need to be, and I think it's because we're all tired of developers changing things under pressure after a game is released. That's a perfectly justifiable reason to be upset. Some have asked why the devs didn't just release a change for the Chinese version and leave the rest of the world out of it. From what I know, there is no version released for China. There's just one international version. There's also the theory that some of this change was done so the developers could potentially get a license for distribution in China, which could help the studio in future releases. I'm not sure how true that is, but it makes sense. For those who have the physical edition, you can always reinstall and disable updates and play through without changes. However, after doing some research, I don't think the story changes are quite as drastic as people have been making them out to be. I think it's also important to note that even if the CCP wasn't directly involved in this, it's possible that the devs were concerned that if things continued to get out of hand, the local authorities, who were already involved, could have escalated things much more. I saw one commenter say, "So we're just going to appease the commies then?" Like, do you realize that the people in China don't really have much of a choice in that? It's either that or get disappeared in the middle of the night. The entire government all the way down is communist, you moron. Of course they would just cave if the pressure came down from the top. Anyway, as I said, I think there is a cultural barrier here that a lot of us in the West just cannot wrap our brains around because it's so different from how we look at things. Historical fiction is fine, and even in video games, we don't tend to care if people take certain liberties with historical figures up to a point. Not even going to talk about Assassin's Creed Shadows, since that's obviously a case where people were pissed off for a variety of reasons, not the least of which being that the historian that much of Sasuke's information was based on was quoting himself and essentially making things up as he went.
Nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the f*** up.
Even Japan got sick of Ubisoft's nonsense. There's also the Netflix Cleopatra, where Egypt sued because of how off the rails it went. Again, historical fiction is fine, but you have to at least show respect for the people and era you're depicting. In Wuchang, people like Zhao Yun are treated with reverence and awe, even if you do end up fighting him as a boss. So, again, personally, I don't see how any of that is offensive, but I'm not from China, and I don't fully understand what it's like to be in that cultural and political climate. We can decry censorship, and rightfully so, but I also want to recognize that there are pressures there that the devs have to deal with that we don't, And maybe those circumstances can be seen as mitigating factors to how upset we should be about it. I don't know. Just spitballing. Anyway, all of that said, I really enjoyed the game. I'm prepping to do a trophy cleanup on New Game Plus, and I'm just farming Red Mercury to overboost my stats because it's time for a power fantasy run and just crush everything. I know, there are those who feel like New Game Plus is tantamount to cheating because, again, you're a sweaty tryhard who can't enjoy things unless you're suffering. I hope things get better for you someday, but for the rest of us who enjoy getting revenge in overpowered ways, I can't wait to do it. I'll probably take a chance on Liza P as well, since that was free on PSN Plus for August, so I'm not spending any money on it. I'm also looking forward to Chronos: The New Dawn from Bloober Team, and Silent Hill F comes out at the end of the month as well. Plus, I need to get around to finishing my video series on the Silent Hill 2 remake. It's only been a year, so hopefully the nut jobs have quit screeching about the game being woke somehow. All of that should be coming within the next couple months, so look forward to that. In the meantime, you can always go watch my review of Death Stranding 2 that the algorithm apparently has hated, since it's only gotten 7 views as of this recording, which is radically low compared to my usual view count. I must have said something the overlords didn't like. Who knows? Anyway, that's it for me. Do the like, share, and subscribe thing if you enjoyed the video, and I'll be back to yap at you all again about games later. Take care.